Okay, so this is a bit different, as this is a follow-up Roman report, so these are generally going to be shorter than the usual Roman report videos, and be a bit more off the cuff. But they're no less important because they give me the opportunity to check back in with previous topics and update you guys on new developments while providing my unvarnished thoughts. Emphasis on unvarnished because the auto industry is nothing if not constantly in motion. So who knows, this might already be out of date by the time it reaches you. I mean, look at this. I mean, really, look at this. This failed merger between Honda and Nissan. When I reported on Nissan's struggle back in December, the idea of a merger with Honda was presented as almost an afterthought, because it seemed too ludicrous to actually happen. But then talks became serious, and all of a sudden it looked like we were genuinely doing this, like this is happening. Honda and Nissan were going to become the world's third largest automaker, just like that. But in the 2 months since that initial story, the talks have fallen apart, and now it seems Honda is out of the merger discussion altogether. Or are they? As it turns out, Honda might be willing to reconsider, but only under one very specific condition. So let's talk about it. Let's get right in there. I'm not even going to do the theme song this month. It's the Roman Report rebound. Let's go. Now hit the theme song. Roman Report. And I'm following up, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars again. Reuters reported in February that the talks between Honda and Nissan had broken down, and they cited unnamed sources who claimed the reason was due to, quote, Nissan's pride and insufficient alarm about its predicament, as well as Honda's abrupt decision to revise the terms and propose that Nissan become a subsidiary, end quote. On the one hand, Nissan felt they were being undervalued by the revised deal since, after all, they were Japan's second largest automaker. That should carry some capital. On the other hand, it really looks like Honda would have been the one taking on the most financial risk here. I mean, obviously, since Nissan has a whole lot of debt and not a whole lot of cars that are lighting the world on fire. If anything, their cars are lighting the brand on fire, and not the good kind of fire that cleanses as it burns, leaving a trail of ash from which new, fertile ventures can be founded, rich with the lingering, accelerant aromas of varnish and greasy shop rags. Yes, fire, the lapping flames of which will purge— wait, no, I'm talking about cars. That's right. Moving on. Look, I think a lot of people were terrified by the prospect of Honda hopping into bed with Nissan, since the immediate concern was less that Honda would improve Nissan, and more that Nissan would somehow make Honda worse. Never mind that there were any number of potential benefits here beyond getting the Japanese government to stop trying to set the two up like shy middle schoolers at a dance. I mean, for all you might say about Nissan, their Leaf was the first mass-produced EV in the world, and they focused on developing their e-power technology, which uses a gasoline engine and a lithium-ion battery to power an electric motor which exclusively drives the wheels, merging the EV experience with the gasoline-powered experience, but with supposedly a more dynamic performance than a bog-standard hybrid. And who knows what Honda could do with this technology to further refine it, to implement it into the production of electric vehicles in their Ohio facilities that they're already preparing to pump out the upcoming line of EVs. There's a theoretical value-adding proposition here for Honda, but the merger talks fell apart for one of the oldest reasons in the book, if you believe the reports. Ego. Because if you want a collaborative business endeavor to succeed, you gotta Lego that ego, brother. But then you could argue Nissan wasn't entirely wrong to back out. Okay, so back in December, Honda and Nissan signed what's known as a Memorandum of Understanding, which is essentially a sort of formal statement of purpose that lays out what each party's intentions are. What are your goals? What are we trying to have happen here? It's a non-binding document, but it's nice to have because it prevents any confusion about just what each party wants out of this. Now, had this merger actually gone through, they would have become the world's third largest automaker behind only Toyota and Volkswagen. But this didn't happen because of the revision to the MOU. Honda decided this wasn't going to be a merger. It was exactly as Carlos Ghosn warned about. This was going to be a takeover. Now, the initial plan had been to create a holding company that would have both Honda and Nissan as subsidiaries. This way, they're essentially equals, even if only in name. But at some point in those 2 months, Honda executives apparently decided they didn't really want to do the holding company idea and put forth that the only deal they would make was an all-or-nothing proposition. Honda becomes the parent company, and Nissan is the subsidiary. Take it or leave it. As the sources in the Reuters article explain, Nissan wanted nearly equal treatment, and so it led to a lot of strife of the non-cloud variety, with Nissan being reluctant to close certain factories and generally being slow to come to decisions, to such an extent that one of the sources stated they felt Nissan believed they could bounce back from all of this on their own. And hey, take it with a grain of salt, but it's kind of the automotive equivalent of when Venom and Into the Spider-Verse became hits, and it gassed Sony up to the point that they started thinking maybe they didn't need Marvel Studios to make a successful Spider-Man movie. So they pulled him from the MCU before coming to their senses because there was zero chance that the minds behind Morbius were ever going to make something better than a movie that goes from theaters to home video to the flea market resale circuit in the span of 3 months. Yet there doesn't appear to have been a similar coming to their senses moment with Nissan, although I suppose there still could be. But my read, okay, maybe not my read, but my inkling is that maybe it's one part Nissan thinking they could do this on their own or find an investor that will allow them to retain autonomy, and one huge helping of executives who don't want to merge and then find that their services are no longer needed as Honda just replaces them with their own guys. Granted, one would think they'd probably get a golden parachute to go with the pink slip and the kick out the door, but maybe the fear of not getting adequately compensated is enough to scuttle the deal. Or maybe it really is that Nissan felt undervalued and didn't appreciate how the revised proposal essentially minimized the company and its potential contributions. But that just seems hard for me to believe in the wake of everything Nissan doesn't do to change its fortunes. Because everything about how they operate suggests that they truly do think they can pull themselves out of this by ignoring things like the resurgence of hybrids and getting rid of the Versa, which, while not a great car, is among the few sub-$20,000 models that you can get new at a period where people are craving economical cars. It just seems like Nissan maybe looked at Honda's plan and, after more careful consideration, maybe reviewing their books and seeing something approximating a light at the end of an endless tunnel that's darker than a well digger's inseam, decided, hey, we're Nissan. We've been around since 5 years before the invention of the chocolate chip cookie. We don't need their help. We can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, or whatever equivalent Japanese idiom denotes people who don't understand the value of cooperation in a world that's hard enough to live in, much less without support. Because Nissan is struggling, my guy, arguably more now than 2 months ago. Late last year, the company announced a plan to cut its workforce by 9,000 and reduce global production by 20%. But even with these measures, they're still on track towards a $536 million net loss for the fiscal year that ends this month. Which is bad enough until you learn that not 9 months ago, it was projected that there would be a net profit of roughly 380 billion yen, or 2.5 billion US dollars. So somehow they went from being projected to make a ludicrous profit to suddenly being in the hole to the tune of one Ferrari SF90 Stradale? I don't know how to pronounce this. I don't make correctly pronounces Ferrari models money. They're in the hole for $500 million. Now at this rate, I found myself wondering why it matters if Honda wanted to be top dog, because it didn't seem like Nissan could really afford to be picky, right? But it all goes back to the sources who spoke to Reuters, as it was reported that Nissan's decision-making was too slow for Honda. Sort of like having a partner who can never decide where to go eat, or if you're staying home, what they want for dinner. I mean, if we want to be in bed at a reasonable hour, I needed to start cooking an hour ago. Why are you still deciding between pasta and tacos? Honda had hoped to have a deal hammered out by the end of January, only to see the negotiations extend into mid-February. The implication is that this was the reason Honda changed their minds about merging as equals, because Honda didn't see them as equals. And to be fair, it doesn't seem like Nissan saw Honda as their equals either. A source told Reuters that Nissan viewed the revised proposal as, quote, outrageous, end quote, intimating that this new deal was viewed as an insult. And again, in a vacuum, I sorta get it. Honda would have been the company acting from the stronger position, so even if there wasn't an official hierarchy, there would have been an implied one, right? But Honda making the subtext text essentially told Nissan that they weren't going to be valued in the way they probably assumed they would be. But even taking that into account, the end result was going to be the same regardless. Together, they would share development burdens, costs, design infrastructure, all these things that would have made Nissan's life substantially easier, because they wouldn't have had to go it alone, and they would be getting into bed with a well-known automaker with global reach, as opposed to if they went with some private equity firm or private investor where, they don't have experience in the auto sector, but they're looking for an in with an already established name. Yeah, it'll be nice to have money and to continue operating as you always have, but it seems like operating as you always have is part of the problem here. You see, the reason this merger made sense for both Honda and Nissan was because they're behind. They're feeling the crunch from their rivals in a more pointed way. If not in the US, then certainly abroad. BYD has become one of the dominant forces in the EV sector, and it's getting to be impossible to compete with them in China. This is a company that recently pledged to work with Tesla to take down the internal combustion engine car, which BYD sees as their, quote, common enemy, end quote. These are companies who aren't looking to expand their footprint in the EV sector because they're already all the way in. There's no infrastructure concern here where they have to pivot away from what they had been doing to something more financially viable. They're already doing the financially viable thing because the number one way to succeed is to already be successful. But then again, the Leaf was the world's first mass-produced EV. In a way, Nissan should be running this entire EV game. Okay, maybe not running it, but they should be a serious force. They should be sitting on a gigantic pile of money with such a profane surplus of excess capital that they could set that pile on fire like Heath Ledger's Joker. But they clung to outdated tech, unattractive styling, subdued marketing, and poorly planned development, coupled with being largely uncompetitive with other automakers in terms of things like battery range. And even with BYD essentially being locked out of the US due to the 100% import tariffs on Chinese EVs that were enacted last year, Honda and Nissan still have challenges getting people to take their EVs seriously in the United States due to companies like Hyundai, Kia, Rivian, and yes, Tesla. And those brands, they're not making perfect EVs necessarily, but they're out there and they're visible. They're being presented as desirable. Even with the stock price and its public perception taking an AVN award-worthy pounding, Tesla is still a company to be reckoned with, because whether they're actually doing well or not, the reality is that for a lot of people, Tesla is the electric vehicle market. That's just what people think of when they think EVs, the same way WWE has become shorthand for professional wrestling, or Q-tip has become shorthand for cotton swabs, and Kleenex means tissues. I'm a Puffs man myself. Who the hell cares? For better or worse, Tesla is the EV pace car. They weren't the first, but they got the EV marketplace good and warmed up and provided a template for expansion through the early laps of the EV space race. And while I'm loath to give credit to old phony Stark, the one thing that Tesla seemed to understand that no other EV automaker in the United States did was that this race is all about perception. Whether a Tesla is good, whether it's overpriced junk, or whether it's a perfectly serviceable EV option, it doesn't really matter. Marketing your cars as these futuristic status symbols and committing to innovation, even when the innovation doesn't work, or it doesn't work in the way you anticipate it will, or it only works some of the time, it doesn't matter. It's still innovation, and it's still part of your brand identity, and it makes you the cool, desirable brand that people want to be associated with, because you're accessible, but with an air of exclusivity. It's a car plenty of people are perfectly capable of having, that they've somehow convinced themselves is this thing nobody else could ever hope to have, and that makes them better than everybody else. That type of elitism is difficult to replicate now that everybody's trying to do it. And that's why Honda and Nissan were always going to have a bad time, even if the merger had gone through, because their plan of focusing on expanding their electric vehicle lineup wasn't going to mean much if they didn't first deal with the structural problems of how Nissan does business. I talked about it in December, but Nissan made this huge unforced error in how they just sort of ignored that hybrids were gradually coming back into favor, and didn't adjust their business model to account for it. And what people sort of got out of that was that Nissan wasn't really doing their due diligence in keeping up with what the market demanded. And so that now, even if they do make hybrids a priority, the moment may pass by the time they actually get around to being more focused on hybrids, to the extent that they should have been in the first place. And I think this all ties into Honda's apparent frustration that Nissan is slow to make decisions. Had they been more connected to the shifting tides of the automotive market, they might have been able to pick up on the resurgence of hybrids early enough to capitalize on it in some way. But that just didn't happen. And I'm not saying that focusing on hybrids would have necessarily saved Nissan, but it potentially could have given them a little bit more lead time to figure out the next move that potentially could save them. So what happens now? Well, the Financial Times noted last month that Honda was open to resuming potential merger talks if, and only if, Nissan CEO Makoto Uchida stepped down. Reportedly, things have been frosty between Uchida and Honda CEO Toshihiro Mibe once the latter had become truly aware of just how badly Nissan had been mismanaged. Financially, anyway. Uchida had been expected to right the ship, but that didn't really happen. And now Uchida is facing internal pressure to resign, despite the fact that his contract doesn't expire until 2026. It's sort of a similar situation to what's going on, or what did happen with Carlos Tavares over at Stellantis. But here, Uchida's reportedly even getting stick about it from Renault. It's all very informal right now, but it's hard to imagine that the writing isn't on the wall for the guy.
Breaking news, everybody gotta know the breaking news, just in case we're gonna die and it might be soon. If a disaster's coming fast, I got your breaking news.
Alright, I have desperately got to stop covering Nissan, because the last time that I covered Nissan on the Roman Report, I ended up having to break into the video with a breaking news bulletin, and the same thing is happening now. The video is done. It's already up for our patrons, and I'm having to cut back in to let you know that Makoto Uchida is officially out as the Nissan CEO, to be replaced by 46-year-old Ivan Espinosa, a man who joined Nissan in 2003 and has mostly been stationed in Mexico, but although he's also worked in Europe and parts of Southeast Asia. And it's really kind of a heartbreaking end. Let me read you some of Uchida's statement, because this was apparently announced via Zoom press conference, because that's the world we're living in now. He said that, "I believe that quickly passing the baton to my successor is the way to take responsibility as CEO of the company. To this end, I have been striving to improve Nissan's performance. However, since we unveiled the turnaround plans last fall, people not only outside the company, but inside began to question my responsibility. Given that I am unable to gain the confidence of some of my employees and that the board made a request, making a fresh start will be in the best interest of Nissan. I deeply regret that I have to pass the baton to my successor under these circumstances. And it's really kind of heartbreaking in a way. Like, I feel bad for the guy. I really, really do. He expresses hope for the future in the sense that Espinosa is someone in his 40s and he's also, quote, a real car guy. I don't know if this is to imply that other people who've held this position aren't real car guys, but maybe it's to imply that he would be taking the company in a more enthusiast direction. I don't know, but Espinosa apparently didn't know about this. Like, I mean, either that or he was informed late, because he says that I just found out about this appointment. Here, let me read the whole thing. He says, quote, "To be honest, since I just found out about this appointment, I don't have much to say. However, I really want to express my gratitude to the board for trusting me to lead the company through these challenging times." End quote. So I think this could potentially put the Honda and Nissan merger talks back on the table, because Nissan has now satisfied Honda's one condition for coming back to the negotiation table. But what that actually means for Nissan's future going forward, or Honda's for that matter, is going to be something that's going to take a much longer time to find out, obviously. But I'm going to continue with the rest of the video as it was, because a lot of what remains is speculation about the potential directions that a merger could go and whether or not it's a good idea. And so hopefully you guys stick around and enjoy the rest of the video. Blah, blah, blah. Why can't I talk? Lisp. Hopefully you stick around and enjoy the rest of the video, and let me know what you think in the comments. Back to you, Nick.
But even with Uchida gone, there's no guarantee that the revised Honda deal would go through anyway, because it would require executives at Nissan accepting the uncertainty of their involvement in any sort of new venture. Maybe Honda will want all the old figureheads gone. Maybe they'll want to implement different ideas that fundamentally change what Nissan is and what the brand means in the eyes of consumers. Or take the company in a different direction that is incompatible with the vision Nissan executives have for the company. I don't know if Nissan getting into bed with some other private equity or private investment firm would make much sense. Or if getting into bed with another automaker for that matter. I mean, I guess Tesla, maybe they would have the capital to do this, but even then, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? There have been rumors out there that a consortium of Japanese businessmen and even the former prime minister have been getting together to potentially try and convince Tesla to save Nissan. But how much sense does that really make for Tesla right now? How much sense does it make for any automaker? Especially when Nissan wants to retain autonomy, it seems. Because anyone who'd spend the amount of money it would take to pull Nissan out of the tailspin would obviously want some kind of control as a means of assuring a return on their investment. It wouldn't make sense for anybody to invest in this company and to just allow the people in charge to keep running things as they always have. But while it might not seem like the company would be a value add to Honda's portfolio, there could be some potential benefits. And this is without getting into the Renault of it all and what they would want in order to sell their shares, or Mitsubishi backing out of talks to focus on being a volume economy brand, while struggling to sell enough cars to even justify that minimalist approach. I'd have to think that there could be some interesting crossover in their respective luxury brands, with Acura implementing some aspects of Infiniti, if not repurposing entire models for a new line that can make people believe they were doing something new or exciting. Because at that point, they would be, right? Presumably. They could maybe even retool some of the pricier Nissans for a more upscale market, like, I don't know, just make a fancier Armada. This way, you'd be freeing up Nissan to become a more cost-effective brand by focusing solely on economy, since they would be filling a desperately underserved niche in the modern car market. Because people want cheap cars. They need cheap cars. And with Honda providing gearboxes, that would presumably help solve the awful CVT problems that Nissan has been having, along with any number of build quality concerns that Honda's infrastructure could help address, to where the cars being made are more economical to consumers and generally last longer, you know? It'd probably cost more to make them in the beginning, but those costs have every possibility of falling over time once the framework is in place. Or, if Nissan doesn't want to become the cheap car brand, they could rededicate their efforts to becoming an EV powerhouse while Honda adapts the architecture of the Armada and Xterra to finally start making dedicated body-on-frame trucks. Now, I'm not saying any of this would necessarily work or that it's even a sensible idea for what the needs of each company present, but rather to just point out that there may be something in this for Honda too, even if it doesn't seem like they have anything to gain from all this. It's going to take time for Nissan to figure out what its future is going to look like, but the problem is that they don't have a lot of time, if we believe the sources from my report in December, which is, well, okay, they weren't my sources, but basically the implication being that Nissan only had a year left to live. I don't know that I necessarily believe that, but it does seem like we should be having an all-hands-on-deck situation at Nissan, that alarm bells should be going off and Nissan executives should be meeting this situation with the gravity and urgency that it deserves. But if you believe some of the sources that would know better, that doesn't really seem to be the case. So if it's not going to be Honda, it has to be somebody. And they've got to figure it out sooner rather than later. Well, obviously. But what do you think? Will the merger go through now that Nissan has a potential inroad back to the negotiation table, or have they biffed it for good? Do you think Nissan can survive without Honda, or is this the specific company that can help them the best? Are there others out there who would make a better fit? Could Nissan even potentially make it on their own? Should this merger even happen, or are both companies better off on their own? I want to hear from you in the comments, because I'm in there. I'm reading it, I'm scouring, I'm replying. Be on the lookout for username LimitedTimeRoman, because I want all of the thoughts. All of those thoughts, I want them. If you liked the video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or even sharing the video so we can get a real discussion going on in here. And if you'd like to support us, consider subscribing and tapping that bell icon so you're notified for every new video. Lastly, for every order that comes through on our merch site linked in the description, I'll send you a personalized thank you video. On the subject of thank yous, thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.
Hello, you've reached the end of the video. I'm proud of you. If you come this far, I know you want to go farther. RCR's Patreon has tons of more content and all the stuff that I can't get away with on YouTube anymore. It's fun, it's bawdy, and it's extra dirty. And for $1, you get all of it. That's it. Less than the cost of a Costco hot dog. $1, you get double the content. You know what else? If everybody who watched this video joined our Patreon, RCR would be unstoppable. There's no telling what we could do with your support. So please, go to the Patreon, join it. It's only $1. Thank you so much, and thank you for liking Regular Car Reviews.